I'm John Walmsley, Chief Operating Officer at StarFish, and I've really enjoyed our speakers generally so far been telling us, just dive in and get started. And we've been given a whole bunch of clues, and talking to 100 stakeholders is a great one, but not being shy about getting started and knowing you can figure it out. But I was struck when Stan Lapidus talked at the very beginning. He thought there was a couple of areas where you shouldn't just jump in and try and solve it yourself. You should really talk to people who've been there before and have some good answers. And so that takes us to our next session, which is about regulatory, where we have 3 speakers who can talk to us about areas where they've been and give us some direction as we think about the regulatory path for our products. First up is going to be Vesna Janic. She's a fine colleague of mine, a pragmatic and effective QA director. Her expertise in regulatory compliance and conformance standards provides StarFish and our clients with invaluable guidance and assistance. She has certification as registered QA professional GLP and more than 18 years of experience in R&D and QA fields. She's going to tell us about the rather timely topic of preparing for 13485 2016.
I'm going to start with saying that it's really hard to follow the presentations that were this morning, amazing and inspiring, so I'm hoping that I'm not going to bore you. So I'm going to start with a question to the audience. How many of you are actual manufacturers of a medical device? Oh, not bad, maybe 120 of the room. How many of you are planning to be the manufacturer of the medical device? Well, a little bit more, okay. So most of the people may not completely relate to what I'm going to talk about, but if you were here last year, we were talking about preparing for the new standard, which is ISO 13485 2016, the new version. And in quality profession, we set up the systems and we think like, okay, now everything is fine. Then the new standard comes and it kind of disrupts everything that we were doing. I have another question for the audience. Who are the manufacturers? Are you selling to the US? Okay, so all the people who are selling to the US actually didn't have to do as much work for the ISO 13485 of 2016 because the new standard actually incorporates the FDA requirements. So it was kind of similar for StarFish as well because we serve our clients with providing services for international markets, and one of the biggest markets is obviously US. So we already had things in place. But regardless to that, I'm going to just go and tell you what we have learned from our last inspection that was just this springtime. So we're going to go quickly, and I have to say I have a lot of slides, so I may be rushing through it because I thought that I'm talking for 30 minutes. It turned out I'm talking for 15, so I may be running through things. I will talk about some of the requirements, may not read everything from the slides. I'm going to talk about our approach to the transition and then what we have learned from it. And I think this is really important for the people who are planning to upgrade to 2016. Okay, so with all that, let's just look at some of the changes. The first thing is there are a lot of new terminology, which means that the standard is finally recognizing that you have to have an authorized representative. It's finally more clear about clinical evaluation, and it's kind of asking you to define what is your role in medical device industry. Before we were just saying manufacturer, now it's actually more clear. Are you importer, a distributor? And that is obviously to limit the scope of what you need to have in your quality management system. There is a lot about risk, and throughout the standard, there is a so-called risk-based approach in implementing quality management system. Now, most of the experienced quality professionals are already doing this, but now there is a need that you document this. And every time you have a requirement in a standard, this means that when you have an auditor coming in, you have to actually show them some records or documentation to prove that what you were already doing actually exists. So more fun, in saving those records. There is a lot in addition to Section 7 for the design and development, and one of the things is usability, user training, and then requirement for communications with regulatory agencies. Now, again, most of the companies already have this in place, different procedures for advisory notices, medical vigilance, et cetera, but you kind of had to go and verify that you have everything in place. There is more on verification and validation, which is important, and the design transfer is introduced to the standard. So if you look at all those requirements, you can actually see that there is alignment with the US, and it's actually, the standard was kind of following what was already happening in the industry. So there is really not too much that is new, it's just that you now have to record and document that. So again, some changes are now we have device master records, which was, medical device file, which is equivalent to device master records, design and development file that is equivalent to design history file, and management reviews. People who are doing the management reviews already know the value that you're gaining from them. It is not just an idle exercise that you do once a year. And if you're doing it once a year, you will have to justify why it's only once a year. You should be looking at more frequently. We are doing it quarterly because it gives us a nice snapshot of what is going on in the company and how we are dealing with the quality management system. And then, again, the requirement that quality objectives have to include regulatory requirements. It also clarifies some of the responsibilities for the management representative. So that's usually your QA person, responsible for the QMS and regulatory awareness. Then you can't just put anybody into the position of being quality representative. You have to prove that they have proper education and training. And we have encountered in some of our clients, I should say clients that we don't work with anymore, an issue where they would hire a quality manager just before the FDA inspection. They pass the inspection, then they fire the quality manager because they're saving the money. And then 2 years after, when they have to have another FDA inspection, they're panicking, and they're coming to us asking us for help. We are now refusing to help them because it's kind of like we don't want to be associated with a company like that. So, and again, they were putting in a position person that was not properly qualified. Then we have to analyze the data, trends, and see how is our quality management system doing. And then finally, validating the software. So again, if you're working for the FDA, this is not a new requirement. Any software that you're using in your company for maintaining a quality management system in production has to be validated. So for us, this was no big deal because our systems were already validated and we had a procedure in place. This is a big one. Everybody is focused on supplier controls and also on environmental controls for the company itself, where you're doing the manufacturing. So again, standard is now putting this in place, although we already had some of the requirements already in place. So what was our approach? So we had in our system 28 standard operating procedures. We had 58 work instructions, 101 forms, and we had 8 quality assurance specialists to work on it. And we started as a group effort, but we were lucky that it was kind of coinciding with our acquisition of the company in Toronto, so we kind of shifted that to our Toronto staff. So this was kind of what I like to say, killing 2 flies with 1 stroke, making sure that our Toronto staff is going to adopt our procedures, and at the same time, they had an opportunity to bring the best practices from their operations into our procedures. And obviously, we had to coordinate everything with all other departments. So there was a lot of work, a lot of people were involved, and we scheduled it from June 2017 with a goal to finish in December 22nd, and we met the goal, but I can tell you it was really hard to meet the goal because you have to run your business at the same time. So this is technically redesigning your whole quality management system. So it is a lot of work. That's why I'm saying for the people who raise their hands here, start now, or if it's not too late. We formally applied to register in the late fall 2017. Now, do we have any registrars here, any representatives? We don't, okay, great. And this is on tape, so I shouldn't say anything. But there are complications there, and I can talk with you about that later. They are not well prepared. They are learning the same way as we are learning at the same time, and they made our life more difficult because we were switching from one register to another. Has anybody done that before? It's painful. And adding what we call the multi-site certification, and that is complicated too. So they said there is no problem, but actually we had problems. So what we have learned from all this? Well, first of all, it took longer. I already said it took too long. Too many people, too many cooks, you're gonna make up a mess. So one group of people were revising one procedure that is related to another one. They didn't talk to each other. We ended up with different requirements. So what happened in early January, once we noticed all those issues, we had to go back and correct those procedures. Not a big deal. The good news is we had inspection and we passed the inspection, so that is great. One thing that we overestimated was a training requirement, and it's specific to evaluating effectiveness of the training. And I don't know what you have in your training files to support that, but we actually had a lot, but we were still looking how are we going to meet the requirement. So we added biannual evaluation for each employee based on results from internal audits, CAPAs, and RMAs. And if you buy the guide on implementation of the new standard, you're going to see that is exactly what they recommend. And we introduced low and high risk training requirements based on the job position, and we had created an additional form. We were going to document all that. So, and then we presented that to our supervisors, and they said, "Oh my God, you want us to do this?" And we said, "Okay, let's scale back and let's look what we can do." So we then look back at the standard, look back at the interpretation, and look at our requirements. And then we already determined, we already have job descriptions. So this is what you have to have for each employee. You have to have evidence of qualification. You have to have well-documented training. So that is the basic. But then on top of that, we had 360s reviews. We already have performance reviews. So once we talk with our auditors, we have concluded that we actually already meet the standard, and we were meeting it for the years, but we just didn't recognize that at the moment because we were so excited about updating the procedures, right? And so as a result of that, we moved back to annual evaluation of the performance, and we removed the additional form and stayed with the form that we had before. So also what we have learned is that we were actually more excited about the changes than the actual auditors. There was nothing different in an audit. They were looking at the same number of the employees. They were looking at the same number of the procedures. They were not that focused on the differences between the version from 2003 and 2016. So that was kind of a surprise to us. And then, as I said, because there is a huge pressure to meet the deadline, they were actually quite disorganized. Their sales office was not talking with their scheduling office. So we ended up, instead of going with surveillance audit, with the full audit that cost us much more, and it was much lengthier in duration as well. So what can we advise to the companies that are actually looking for? If you're in a good standing with FDA quality system regulations and the previous ISO, you probably don't have to panic. You probably have already enough in place. You have to update your procedures. You have to add the reference to the new standard, maybe do minor tweaking, but not much work. But you have to contact your register right away because they are swamped and they are not that well organized. You need to book that audit right away. If you have not done it, you should schedule your review of QMS against the standard, and once you look at the gaps, it's going to be easier to close those gaps. You should order a practical guide to ISO 13485-2016. This really tells you what you need to do. So, and it, again, when we look at how the standards are developed, they're based on experience of our industry. So there is really nothing new there. This is just a common sense. All the problems that we were encountering, gaps in the previous standard are now addressed. So it actually has advantages because now you can reduce, for example, auditing based on the risk. You only audit the areas where you find the risk, and the risk is documented in your maybe CAPAs or NCRs or RMAs or other issues that you may have. However, if your software is not validated, you may have a bigger problem because that does take a little bit more time. And I like the talk about Agile, and I enjoyed that one particularly. People get scared when you say software validation. It's actually not a rocket science. Say how you're using the software, write your test scripts, write your acceptance criteria, go through it, and you're done. But people freeze when you say software validation, and they think this is really something horrible. So that would be one thing that you really have to do. For your HR files, make sure they are complete and have them ready for the audits. For your training requirements, you do have to have a matrix. Every auditor that we had was looking for the matrix. So you do have to document, like, this is what was required for this person. Yes, we have it in place. Obviously, if you can afford this training software, that is even better. Then you don't have a problem demonstrating that. And again, there are some new requirements in the standard. So if you don't have those procedures, just simply write them and you will be fine. And then for your management reviews, do justify the frequency. If you're going with annual, you have to justify why is that enough. Because if you look at the problem that was in January, and you're reviewing in January 2017, and you're doing the review in January 2018, how effective is your quality management system? So if I were the auditor, I would object to that. Then for the quality objectives, make sure you have regulatory requirements there, and then look thoroughly to your supplier controls and make sure that you have documentation and records in place. So that would be all, and I'm at 0. Half an hour into 15 minutes. I'm proud of myself. I would be happy to answer any questions later. Oh, there is one question. Do we have? Probably not. Yeah, not the coincidence. When we were updating our system, we have completely ignored the new MDR. The reason is that the EU is supposed to come up with some 100 guidances on the implementation, and they have not come up with anything yet. So it is really hard. They have very strict requirements, and it will be very hard for the industry to meet those requirements. So we are waiting for the guidances, and we are kind of looking into a year from now, hoping that we're going to have some guidances on how to do it, to start adding the MDR requirements to our, yes, knock on the wood, yeah. And I didn't talk about MDSAP either, because MDSAP doesn't apply to us. We are contractor, but the people who want to sell in Canada have to have MDSAP as well. And based on the feedback from the auditors, it's just a lot of work for no additional value. And it hurts me as a quality professional when I see that we are doing something that does not bring any value to the company, because we are trying to communicate to engineers and to management, to everybody, that having a quality management system is actually helping us to go faster to the regulatory and to make better products. So when the registrars or regulators come up with something that doesn't bring any value, it's really bad. Thank you.